weapons, salute him, and then speak together. Face the Emperor, and don't turn your back on him. Go, and die with honor.
Gladiator, anybody? Right? We can basically go home now. Like, that was awesome. Yeah, so why did we choose that clip at the beginning of this session? Well, let me explain to you exactly why I chose that clip. When you watch that clip, it makes you ready for battle. Are you ready for battle? You're in one. You're in one right now. And what I love about the clip that we just saw, for those of you who haven't seen Gladiator, let me catch you up just a little bit. Our main character's name is Maximus. He's a leader in the Roman army, and he is well loved by his troops. He's well loved by the emperor. And through a series of unfortunate events, not of the Lemony Snicket variety, he winds up enslaved to Rome and forced to fight as a gladiator in the arena. Now, the scene you just saw, I think, is brilliantly done. This is the scene where he and his fellow gladiators fight in the Roman Colosseum for the first time. And I love how the filmmaker takes you there, and you're kind of with Maximus in that moment. See, the men are all handling this moment in different ways. Some of them are terrified about what's coming. They're shaking. They're not warriors. They're not prepared. Some of them think they can handle it, and they're ready to go with no idea of what's coming. And Maximus is a seasoned warrior. He knows what's ahead, so he's resigned himself to battle. And as we enter the arena with the gladiators, which is what I love that the filmmaker does, we get the same sensation that they get as they step out onto that sand, and that is the reverberation of the ground itself. Everything seems to be shaking with the noises from the crowds. And you see that they're overwhelmed as they kind of stumble around for a second and look, just taking it in, because it's an incredible sight. And now it's real. In that moment, Maximus is aware of something that we are aware of too. There is going to be something that comes through those gates that he has to defeat in order to live to fight another day. That's the obvious battle. But there's another battle going on underneath the surface. That's the one we're not so aware of until the film progresses a little bit more. Maximus knows that in order to ultimately survive this, he has to win those crowds. He has to understand what drives them. He has to know a little bit about their desires. He has to understand them in order to engage. Men and women, and I will address you as men and women because that is what you are. You're not boys and girls, you are men and women, and we need you in the battle that we face. You're standing in the midst of a battle where you are fired upon every single day from every different direction, and you're not always aware of what's happening. Because it's not a battle that you see, it's under the surface. It's a battle of ideas. Now here's the thing about ideas. Ideas have real world consequences. The topic that I most often talk about in the work I do with Life Training Institute is the topic of abortion. And in that topic, there's a peculiar idea that undergirds it as well as every other injustice that we face as human beings. It's the idea that some human beings matter more than others. Men and women, that idea is playing itself out in our culture to the tune of around 3,000 human deaths every single business day. That's more than 3 times the population of this room. Ideas have consequences, and they can, as the movie Inception said, be the most dangerous thing. They got that right. Our culture is struggling to answer a very important question. It deals with the nature of moral truth. On your campuses and on the campuses that you will leave your high school and go to, your fellow students are struggling to answer the question, is moral truth real? Is it something that I can know, or is it something that I just decide for myself? And the way people are answering those couple of questions, dealing with the nature of moral truth, are playing themselves out in front of us. So in the time that I have with you today, I want to take a glimpse beneath the surface. I want to look at the way our culture understands moral reasoning and help you understand a little bit about that so you can kind of get the right posture, as it were, when you take the information you've gained from this conference out into the world and you're interacting with other people. I hope this will help you. And after that, we're going to look at some practical ways that you can engage, just some good ideas to go about conversations, which would be the everyday types of battles, as it were, that you'll face, the obvious ones. So without further ado, let's get started. To talk about this properly, I think we need to talk about something that's very important to me besides Gladiator, and that is ice cream. Can we do that for a few minutes? Is it ever too early in the day for ice cream? Seriously, right? Well, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. That's right, all right. And in Atlanta, there is a little-known place. It's kind of a hole in the wall, so you have to kind of know about it to go to it. It's called Jake's Ice Cream and Sorbets. Now, it's on the Beltline. It's right down the street from the Martin Luther King Memorial, and you're all welcome for me telling you about this place. See, Jake's makes everything from scratch. They make their ice cream on site. They make everything that goes into the ice cream on site. It's basically a religious experience. I'm just being real with you when you walk in. So I'm going to make a couple of claims about Jake's Ice Cream so we can properly talk about moral reasoning, because that makes sense, and that's just how my brain works, so deal with it. Jake's salted caramel ice cream in a waffle cone. We can take a moment of silent reflection if you need to. I'm good with that. Is the best dessert on the face of the planet. Raise your hand if you think that's a true statement. Awesome. We could have like a fan club or something. All right, well, just out of curiosity, raise your hand if you're offended that I think it's a true statement. I'm serious about my ice cream, too. It's okay. It's all right. Well, let's try this statement. Jake's salted caramel ice cream in a waffle cone is the cure for juvenile diabetes. Raise your hand if you think that's true. Don't raise your hand. We'll pray for you. I did not raise my hand. Let that be noted by all who are here, lest you think, why did they invite her again? Yeah, that statement was really different than the first statement. Some of you are like, well, that was obvious. The first one was like an opinion. The second one was weird, right? But let me just get a little more detail to help us out. The first statement told you something about me. It was about me. In fact, you learned more about me with that statement than you did about the ice cream. See, I'm the subject, like the subject of a sentence, and that was a subjective claim. Now, subjective truths are truths that you, the subject, create. And because you create them, they are matters of personal preference, like choosing one flavor of ice cream over another flavor. And because you create them, all subjective claims are equally valid. See, my favorite flavor has no more authority than your favorite flavor, which is why most of you weren't really offended by my first claim. Now, the second claim didn't say a lot about me, except maybe you questioned my intelligence for a second. That's fair. But the claim wasn't about me at all. It was about the objects in question. In this case, we have the ice cream and its relationship to the disease. This was an objective kind of claim. Now, Objective truths are truths that exist independently of the subject. They're true whether I prefer them or not. They're true whether I'm even aware of them or not. They are truths that you discover rather than create. And for that reason, when you make an objective claim like the one that I made, it can be right or wrong. It can be true or false. So we have subjective claims, we have objective claims. I'm going to quiz you guys. I'm going to make a few claims, and I want you to collectively say quickly whether the claim is subjective or objective in nature. Here we go. Let me just lob this one to you. Number one, Reese's Pieces are better than M&M's. How many of you said true? Okay, yeah, we can be friends. It was subjective. How about this one? The leaves on the trees change color as the seasons change. Excellent. All right. You guys are a tough crowd. I got one. My husband, Trip, is the most handsome man alive. Be careful. Thanks. You guys haven't even met him. I guarantee if he walked in here, some of you would be like, that is clearly objective. How about the Empire State Building is located in New York City? Yeah, objective. How about Jesus of Nazareth died on a Roman cross and 3 days later he got up from the dead? How about it is wrong to torture toddlers for fun? I was speaking to a mom's group one time, a moms of preschoolers group on this kind of topic, and I made that statement, and a mom literally raised her hand, and she said, define torture. And I thought, you clearly have a 2-year-old, and we need to have coffee after this. Yeah. So our culture gets it confused when it comes to particularly moral claims and religious ones. There's reasons for that. But let's camp out there for just a second. When you make a religious or moral claim out there, the culture hears you making a preference type of claim. There are reasons for that. It's actually the consequences of ideas. And if we had more time, we could trace the ideas that have led us to this place. Because it's kind of a peculiarly modern notion that this is a preference type of thing. But men and women, when you make a religious or a moral claim, and many of the issues you've been hearing about this weekend deal with moral issues, you're actually saying something about the nature of reality. Your statement is not about you. It's about what the world is really like or isn't like. So by its very nature, moral claims are objective in nature, not subjective. Now, the way this gets confused, particularly with the issue I talk about most often, so I'll give you some examples that deal with the issue of abortion, but you can apply the same type of reasoning to the other moral issues you've heard about, because it will begin to sound familiar to you. There's a bumper sticker that exists that says, oh, you don't like abortion? Don't have one. Are any of you familiar with that slogan, that statement? You've seen it before? Yeah, there's a word in there that I have an issue with. Can you guess the word? Yeah, the word like, because it takes an objective claim and tries to twist it into a preference type of claim. It's not that kind of claim. I was on a campus a few years ago speaking to a group of students about this issue, and there was a young woman there who was protesting the event. It was a pro-life event, and she had a poster that said pro-choice and proud of it, and she was angry, obviously very angry. She was saying things to people as they came to the event. And I approached this young woman and asked if we could talk for a second. She was very open to that. She said, sure. I said, great. What brought you out today? Tell me about your poster. She said, here's the deal. I would never have an abortion. But what you're doing here on campus today, you can't tell other people what's right and wrong. You can't push your morality on other people that way. I kind of think you need to get off the campus. I said, well, thank you for your honesty. Do you mind if I ask you a question? Because I'd heard something she said. I wanted to ask her about it. She said, sure. I said, what do you personally oppose about abortion? She'd said that she would never have one. She said, well, it kills a baby. I said, I want to understand your view. So tell me if I have it wrong. You think abortion kills a baby, but you think it should be okay for other people to kill babies? She got really quiet. See, she'd always bought that this moral issue was a subjective kind of thing, like ice cream. And I was just trying to point out to her that it's not that kind of issue, so we could have a real conversation, and we did. We left on friendly terms. I don't know if I changed her mind, but we gave each other something to think about. Several years ago now, in the last election cycle, in this very city, the vice presidential debate took place. And in that debate, the moderator framed the question on abortion in a particular way that I want to point out to you, because it wasn't all that different in the last election either. She had two Catholic candidates sitting in front of her. That was historic. She pointed that out. And then she said, "Gentlemen, I want to know how your religion has influenced your own personal view on the issue of abortion. And gentlemen, this is a touchy subject. Remember, you must speak personally." That's the national stage. Our country is dying to talk about issues like this as if they are subjective issues, and they're not. Go back to that slogan that I mentioned just a minute ago. What if that bumper sticker read, "Oh, you don't like slavery? Don't own a slave." You don't like spousal abuse? Don't beat your spouse. Those are moral issues too, and we're just a little bit clearer on those. But the way that we have these conversations about moral issues, they are objective conversations. They are not about us, and they're not dealing with our preferences or the preferences of the person that we're talking to. Now, that's difficult because it's gotten really confused in this battle on ideas. But when we realize this, let me just tell you how this helps your stance when you're talking to other people, because you've got to get this in your own head before you can take it out into the world and help other people achieve some clarity. When I talk about abortion, and I tell people that I think abortion is wrong because it intentionally kills innocent human beings, I actually think I'm right about that. And I think that people who disagree with me are wrong. Now, in the culture we live in, that sounds arrogant. Would you be transparent with me for just a second and tell me, when I said that, did it hit you that way? Did you think, whoa, I couldn't say it like that? I can't claim to be right in this culture. I live in the same culture you do, but I had to work through this. And what I've learned is that when I make that statement and understand that it is objective in nature, in other words, it doesn't rest on me, what I'm actually submitting to the person in front of me or the people in front of me is that I could be what about that? Wrong. Objective statements by their very nature can be right or wrong, true or false. I don't think I'm wrong when it comes to that particular issue. I have excellent reasons for having arrived at the conclusion that abortion is wrong. It's a different conversation. But I could be. That's actually a humble stance to take. And I think we live in a culture that's trying very hard not to be arrogant. But listen to this. If I were to draw from the culture and say, this is my moral position, it's my truth, I created it, what I would in essence be saying to the person I'm talking to, because of the nature of subjective claims, is, hey, I think I'm right about this, and I can't be wrong. Because all subjective claims are equally valid. It's a battle of ideas, guys. Paul understood this when he said that the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of strongholds, that we're to tear down arguments and every lofty opinion raised up against the knowledge of God. We're to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Romans 12:2, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We've got to get it right when it comes to these issues. The more you realize these are objective issues, the freer you will become in conversation. The truth doesn't rest on you. It's true or false apart from you. It stands all by itself. All you have to do is point to it. That takes the pressure off a little bit. It also does something else for you. When you're having these conversations and someone attacks your view, in a culture that believes that everything is subjective, it feels like a personal attack. Because when we believe that moral truth is ours to create, it feels like you've attacked the person and not just the idea, but that's not the nature of moral reasoning. Morality is objective in nature, which means when someone attacks your view, you don't have to get angry. Rather, you can be curious about them. This changes things entirely. When someone comes to you and says, I don't think that God is real at all, it should be in your mind as if somebody has come up to you and said, I think that 2 + 2 is 5. Another objective type of thing. I don't know the alternative to 2 + 2 is 4, do you? I would naturally be very curious as to why this person thought that. It would probably open the door for a conversation, which shifts me to some very practical things to leave you with. Some ways to engage. If you can get that stance, if you can understand in your mind that morality is objective in nature, that should shed some light on the way people have exchanges about moral ideas and what we see right now. It's very heated, but it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be. You can speak the truth in grace and with love. One wonderful way to do that in the time I have left with you is because now you are free to be curious about that other person and where they're coming from, as we should be. You can begin to ask the right kinds of questions that will lead you into a conversation that is completely unlike anything the culture experiences right now. Questions are your best friend. Now, what do questions do? When you begin asking questions, they do several things. The first thing that questions are friendly, right? They're very flattering to someone. Don't you like being asked about yourself? It's kind of a cool thing when somebody asks you a question. They want to know more about you. They want to know where you're coming from. They want to know what you like and what you don't like. So you're free to do that. You can ask these types of questions and begin a friendly conversation. Invite somebody to engage with you. Listen to them, because asking good questions and learning to ask good questions makes you a better listener. You might just learn something when you ask questions. Guys, I was on the flight here yesterday, and the person sitting next to me was like 7 years old. I learned a ton from him. He was a super cool kid. I learned a lot about Minecraft. That's different. But I can go home and share that with my son, who was also interested in that kind of thing, right? You can learn things from anyone. And this kind of brings me to another point. You don't have to master every subject before you can engage with questions. The speakers that you've heard, last night it was Alan and Sean, they are subject matter experts in their fields. And sometimes we hear them and we learn from them and we think, I could never do that. Yes, you can. When you ask somebody questions, you don't have to have mastered their view. You just need to know what they believe to engage with them. So you're much more free, and now that you have some equipping from your other speakers, that will go well for you. Questions move things along. They're very neutral. They're non-threatening, and because they give you some element of control in a conversation, they help you guide the conversation. If you're having a conversation about a moral issue, you can sense whether the other person grows uncomfortable, and you can know kind of where to go from there. 3 types of questions that you need to understand how to ask, and these 3 types of questions come from a friend of mine named Greg Kokel, also a Christian apologist with the organization Stand to Reason. He calls these the Columbo questions. Now, Columbo was a television detective of like my dad's era. But he's awesome, and you can still watch his reruns. And if you like detective shows like I do, then you might become a fan. The thing about Columbo is every time he comes up on a crime scene, he's always kind of wrinkled and disheveled and a little bit seemingly forgetful. He never has his pencil. He's always kind of fumbling around looking for things and like, I'm so sorry. I got this. But then he begins to do something incredible. He begins to say, something is bothering me about this. And he begins to ask questions. And then he asks another. And then he asks another, and you can tell he's getting underneath the surface. Something's beginning to happen because the suspect in the show grows uncomfortable. And he'll say, just one more thing. I'm being a pest, but just one more question, just one more question. And before you knew it, he's solved the crime through asking questions. He's found the problem. 3 types of Columbo questions that you need to make your very best friend. The first type of question you can ask in a conversation is simply to gather information. Put yourself in a journalist's shoes. You just want to know what that person believes. Now, these types of questions, the most common wording that if you can just remember this, you'll be golden. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? That's the best form of that question. What do you mean by that? You can ask someone for clarification. Let's say they make a claim about something and you hear it and you go, whoa. And you want to know, could you just repeat that for me? That would be one way to ask that. Maybe they said a word and you're not quite sure how they're using it. Ask them what they mean by that word. Ask for a definition of terms. That helps, doesn't it? Because if we're trying to understand what someone believes, we don't want to attack what they don't believe. So this question is one that you can hang out on all day long. You're just learning about that person. Now, the second type of question is a little bit different. The first type of question is to gather information. You're asking, what do you believe? Who is that? Where was that? What's involved? What are the facts? The second type of question wants to know why they believe it. This type of question is asking for reasons. Reasons. Another way to phrase this question, other than the simple question, why, which my 5-year-old has mastered, like masterfully. Why? Anyway, I didn't know there were so many like tones that you could use with that word of why. But you can use that too, and it's quite effective. The other way you can phrase this is, how did you come to that conclusion? Women should have the right to choose. I hear this all the time. My first question is, choose what? Because I'm pro-choice on any number of things, just not that, right? But my second question would be, well, how did you come to that conclusion? Tell me why you believe that. See, what happens here is when you ask people for reasons, oftentimes people have not thought through their view. We live in a soundbite culture, so oftentimes they've heard it on TV, they've read it on a bumper sticker, they saw it in a magazine, someone they look up to said it, some celebrity promoted it, and they've adopted it as their view. And when you ask them why, oftentimes you'll get silence in response because they've never really thought it through. If that happens, it's kind of a good thing because you have graciously asked them to think through their view, and you've done it in a non-threatening way. The final question that you can reach with Columbo is one that requires you to know a little bit more. After you've learned what the person believes, after you've asked them for their reasons, if you catch something in what they've said and you know a little bit about the particular moral issue you're talking about, you can offer an alternative view, and you can do it in the form of a question. With embryonic stem cell research, the type of stem cell research that takes the lives of innocent human beings, oftentimes people will ask, what do you think about stem cell research, Megan? My first question is, what do you mean by stem cell research? Because there are many different types of stem cell research. And they'll say, well, embryonic stem cell research is so promising because it can save all kinds of lives if they can just harness the power of these stem cells. My second question is, well, how did you reach that conclusion? I want to know, why do you believe that? But when I offer the alternative view, it might go something like this. If you don't mind, can I just offer an alternative view for you? Have you ever considered that there's another type of research, stem cell research, called adult stem cell research? And that type of stem cell research doesn't take innocent human life. Rather, it harvests someone's own skin cells and tricks them into performing like embryonic stem cells. And because they share the same DNA as the person they were harvested from, adult stem cell research has been shown to help with almost 50 different diseases, whereas embryonic stem cell research has proved ineffective so far. Have you considered that? Still a question. Still on friendly terms. Men and women, when it comes to the climate that's out there, the better that you can understand that morality is an objective kind of thing, the more light you can shed on that, the more you will be able to engage this culture with good dialogue and offer them the truth in love. But you've got to understand that first so that you will have the courage to step into that space and not be fearful of offending someone. Remember, when you attack a view, you're not attacking an individual. Sometimes you have to do a little work to make that clear to the person, but don't be afraid. Because when you spare people engagement on these issues, you're not sparing them pain. You're sparing them the healing that only the gospel can bring to them. To the degree that you are willing to step into the game, get up to bat, ask them questions. As Greg would say, put a stone in their shoe. That's all you need to do is give them something to think about. To the degree you're willing to do that, your courage will inspire courage in others. And you will become, to the degree that you are willing to do that, and to the degree you're willing to believe what you learned the very first night, that is who you are and why you matter. The more you adopt that and walk in it, it's called the gospel, the more dangerous you will become to a world like this one in the best possible way. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. That's some powerful things that Megan's been talking about. So we're going to take a few minutes, and we want to make sure that you take advantage of this opportunity for you to text in some questions. I'm excited about especially this particular session because it's such a flashpoint in our society. So you want to make sure you get on Twitter and you do Reconnect 17. Send in some of your questions. Before some of the questions start rolling in, one question I have. Okay, so this is going to be fun. All right.
Oh, boy.
It's not going to be. We're friends here. You know, we're thinking the same thing. We're all on the same page. But I love, particularly in this subject, there are people that will say to me, good friends of mine, who we completely disagree with. And I love the whole moral reasoning thing. So we got to get to that in a minute. But I have some good friends, and I'm sure you have some good friends as well, who will bring up the issue, and you know, they're Christ followers, they love Jesus, and when they think of abortion, they think to themselves, well, I don't know, it just seems like a done issue. You know, I mean, legislatively, nothing's really going to happen. You know, why don't we just move on to something that's a little more pressing? And so I can see already, you're like, oh, no. And again, I'm not saying this. I'm just saying, how do we handle maybe friends or family or just people that we have discussions with that are like, oh my gosh, can we please move on from this and get on to a different issue?
Right, that's a great question. I didn't get to talk a lot about abortion other than use it in some examples. So I will very quickly say this and then punt to Life Training Institute if you want to learn more, or next year's conference, you guys probably will address this issue.
Yeah, and remember, next year.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, what I can say is because of the ideas that undergird the issue, particularly that idea that some human beings matter more than others, what we find is if we let it go on an issue like abortion, abortion is a watershed issue. What I mean by that is if we're willing to say that human beings in their most fragile state, the most vulnerable among us, are worthless and worthy of being disposed of, then we don't think very much about anyone sitting around us. In other words, if we lose that, we lose why you and I matter, and who gets to say we matter, and who gets to say who counts among us as part of the valuable human family. So if I could do it in a minute or less, you could almost time me. If I were sitting around the Thanksgiving table and Aunt Sally said something like that to me, then I might look at her and say something like this: Aunt Sally, the reason that I am pro-life and the reason why I think this issue matters is because science tells me that from the very beginning, that is, from conception, you, Aunt Sally, were a living, distinct, and whole human being. That is to say, you didn't come into existence piece by piece like a car on an assembly line. You came into being all at once, and everything that makes you you was already there, and you drove your own development from within. And furthermore, Aunt Sally, differences like size and level of development and environment and degree of dependency aren't good enough differences to say that we could have killed you back then, but can't kill you now.
It's great. Yeah, I mean, it's just, and I love particularly in transitioning to like the moral reasoning aspect of it. And I love how you mention, and this is huge. I think we all can take a page out of this book, is that when we start talking with people, that we transition to questions. A lot of times when we think talking to people, it's like attack, attack, attack. And Lydia actually brings up a really good question. She has a question. So when I'm talking with somebody and we have differences of opinion, how do I convince this person that I'm not personally attacking them? Because all of these things become so personal and subjective, like you're saying. How do we do this in a way that says, look, I'm not attacking you or your beliefs or where you come from or your mom or your family or anything like that. I'm just trying to talk about ideas.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that if you can take a little bit of what we just talked through and find a way to just be very real with them. Sometimes I think you have to say it that plainly, and you have to point out what you see happening in the conversation. So acknowledge when you see someone's getting upset, because Greg Kokel, the man that came up with the Columbo Tactics, his book is a great resource by that name, Tactics. He would say that if anybody in the conversation gets mad, you lose, right? So what I would say is if you see somebody beginning to get agitated and you can read that they're not liking where this is going or that they're feeling attacked by you, just step in and say and acknowledge, hey, I see that you are getting a little bit upset. My guess is that this feels personal to you, because most of the time, the objections to something like abortion or homosexuality or pornography, things that we were talking about over the weekend, most of the time the objections, they aren't always intellectual. And you guys as thinking Christians, because this is a pretty stellar audience, you guys sometimes tend to think, well, I've got an argument for you. But sometimes the objections are emotional. And so beginning your conversation with these types of questions helps you kind of gauge that. And acknowledge when you see someone getting upset. Ask him why. Say, I see you're getting upset. What's upset you? And maybe it can lead to more of this conversation of pointing out, oh, I wasn't attacking you. Oh, I see that person who's close to you has experienced this. I had no idea. I'm so sorry about that. I wasn't attacking them. You see? And then you move on with your conversation, perhaps through questions.
This is the last day of the conference, so a lot of us are kind of like zoning out. If you didn't write that down, write it down now. That's a great answer. It's genius. If someone starts getting upset with you and you can see it's starting to escalate, cut from the reasoning and say, oh, maybe I've made a mistake here. Is this something that has touched you? I mean, like, let's talk about this, because I don't want to offend anybody. I just want to talk about ideas. Yeah. I think it's genius. Yeah. Now, Megan brings up a really good question. Out in the crowd here, Megan, not you, Megan.
Great name.
There's a Megan out there who's got a question that says, so what if they start attacking you? And, we're human. Yeah. We're human. So someone starts attacking us and we think, man, I got to start fighting back. We live in a culture where it's like, you punch me, I'll punch you back twice as hard. No, that doesn't seem to be the Jesus way. How do we do that?
I'm glad you said the Jesus way. And you're right. I would start there. Guys, I don't know how to talk about moral issues or anything really in my life that's serious and worth talking about without doing it through the lens of the gospel. When someone attacks you, the first thing you have to be aware of, and I know it's upsetting, it's not fun to be attacked, but the first thing you need to be aware of is they attacked him too. So look to him as your example. Jesus asked questions all the time that he already knew the answer to in certain situations to take the heat down a little bit. But if somebody attacks you, keep your posture in mind. It's probably because they themselves feel attacked. So you're in this type of situation, again, where you can have the insight to go, don't get mad, ask a good question. This happened to me actually in Connecticut. I met some girls from Connecticut last night. I don't know where you are, but hi. So I was in Connecticut speaking last year, and I was at a hotel late at night after I'd spoken at a school that morning. The restaurant was closed, so I was eating dinner at the bar. And my plan was I was going to eat my salad, go watch Gilmore Girls. That was the plan.
Gilmore Girls.
I'm just saying. I'm just
Gilmore,
being real
write
with
it
you.
down. Gilmore Girls.
No,
okay?
they're too holy to watch that.
I don't even know.
It's fine. And I was sitting at the bar in Connecticut, freezing to death because I'm from Atlanta, and I had on a sweatshirt that the school had given me that day. And it was a Catholic school that I'd spoken at that morning. So some men at the end of the bar were having a very heated conversation post-election about the election. And they started talking about abortion. And in this moment, the Holy Spirit was like, ding, you need to enter that conversation. My response was a side conversation with the Holy Spirit that said, that's not the plan. The plan is eat Gilmore Girls. I don't want to engage with these men who are clearly, they're having fun. They're fine. And as you know, the Holy Spirit was like, wrong answer.
I thought it was ding. I think it's ding.
Yeah.
Ding.
Well,
ding. Holy Spirit was ding. Is something
ding.
different.
Well, no, he told me.
To ding. Okay, and then it was
And then it was wrong answer.
Okay.
That is the plan.
Got it.
Because then one of the men turned and asked me about my sweatshirt. I was like, fine. This whole thing in my head. He wanted to know what my sweatshirt was. He's like, oh, you speak in schools. What do you speak about? I was like, oh, my goodness.
Nice.
So much for Gilmore Girls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Out the window.
I speak about abortion. And he goes, oh. And he began to engage me in a conversation. His name was Chris. And he wanted to know about all different kinds of things. I presented a scientific and philosophic case. I told him what my view was. And I was kind of dealing with some of the challenges he threw up in a gracious way, the best that I could. I don't always get it right. But he finally got really mad at me because I was hitting on something. And he threw his hands up. He goes, just stop right there. He goes, you know what? You are just completely ignorant. And I said, Chris, what do you mean when you say that I'm ignorant? He said, you just think you're right. I said, I see. Chris, do you think you're right? He said, yes. I said, help me understand why it is that when you think you're right. But when I think I'm right, I'm ignorant. To his credit, he looked at me and he said, well, that sounded really arrogant when you put it that way. I said, yeah, it did. He said, I'm sorry. And we went on with the conversation.
That's awesome.
So if you can take it and turn it and try to understand where they're coming from. And
Yeah,
by the way, the end of that conversation.
That was good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Megan, thank you so much.
Of course,
yeah.
of course.
Let's hear it from Megan. That was excellent. Some